You can now hear Movie Heaven, Movie Hell on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. Listen anytime, anywhere. Stitcher is an award-winning free app that lets you listen to all your favourite shows, plus discover from 20,000 news, entertainment and sports shows. You can also create your own custom playlists. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad and in over 4 million car dashboards. It's on demand and it's on the go. No downloading, no syncing, no wasted memory. You can stream your favourite podcasts from Stitcher. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And please leave us a review and rating on Stitcher. Thank you. Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aiken, and
I'm Keith Isles, and we are both independent filmmakers that enjoy discussing established directors' films from the history of cinema, where we each pick a film that we like and a film that we don't like so much from the said director's body of work. And it's actually been a little while since we've done one of these, because we've done a few other episodes on other aspects of films and movies, haven't we?
We have, yes. It's it has been a while since we tackled a director's body of work, but you know, we thought, well, this is a director we've known, and you know, we've seen his work as we've grown up, really, because.
Well, yeah, I mean, this guy was inspirational on my journey to film school for sure, because you know, his films started coming out at the time that I started thinking to myself, I want to go to film school. What am I going to do with my life? I want to go to film school. So let's start looking into this. And yeah, this guy was definitely you know, a touchstone on that for sure.
So for those who haven't read the podcast description, who's the director?
Okay, so we're looking at the work today of Peter Jackson, the New Zealand-based film director that started making short films on Super 8 when he was a kid. You know, grew up as a real fan of movies, and by his own admission, actually always intended to be a visual effects artist rather than a filmmaker as such. But obviously he now says that he's a frustrated visual effects artist and you know, a very good filmmaker.
I remember my first memory of sort of knowing who Peter Jackson was. I used to work at a newsagent's, used to do a paper round, and I used to get to read all the magazines and stuff there. And I remember his work used to pop up quite a bit in, you know, magazines like Fangoria, and there used to be another magazine called Action, which was about action films and stuff like that. Yet somehow his work would end up in there. So I remember for a long time seeing stills of Bad Taste.
Yeah, I used to get that magazine as well. I know the one you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have to buy it. I just read it when I was at work, and it was
and put it back on the shelf.
Put it back on the shelf, yeah. Didn't have to keep it. It was like a library.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Borders Books went out of business because of me, because I used to do exactly the same thing. So for many a year, yes.
That's right. Yeah. So, but I think the first film of his I saw was Heavenly Creatures.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was that weird thing, because he did his first 3 films: Bad Taste, Meet the Feebles, and
Brain Dead.
Brain Dead, or as it's known in America as Dead Alive.
Oh, right. Okay, it's one of those alternative title films.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I saw Heavenly Creatures first. I think my parents rented it. And kind of an interesting film, but I got to see Bad Taste finally on VHS, and I actually own a copy of it on VHS.
Right, yes, good old VHS.
I think it's the only well, I think I've got 2 VHSs, that and an old Channel 4 program I taped off it years ago called Movie Virgins, which you can't find anywhere. But that was Movie Virgins. Just for a quick, nobody knows what it is. It came out in '98 when I was starting to learn about filmmaking, and it showed these 2 filmmakers, one who had a budget of about $1 million, and there was another guy who had no money, and it sort of just showed these 2 guys sort of making their film. It was just great because we didn't have DVDs and commentaries and making of documentaries on these DVDs, so it was kind of like my film school.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time, I remember people who had worked on other productions where they had been filming. They had filmed other productions being made, but in the end they went for these 2 as the focus of the series. But I digress.
No, I mean, I think actually on that subject, that's quite interesting, because one of the things about Peter Jackson as a filmmaker is he is a big proponent of home media. So much so that he does incredibly detailed behind the scenes documentaries on most of his films that he actually produces himself. It's not a thing that the studio like many of these things, hire to come in and do. These are things that he, as a fan, he grew up very much, he said, in the sort of Laserdisc day of things, before DVDs even. And, he was always one that liked commentaries and behind the scenes featurettes and all of those sort of things. So as a result, his, when you now buy them on Blu-ray or 4K or whatever, they come with an absolute, abundance of behind the scenes documentaries, retrospectives, how to, A to B comparisons, all of that sort of thing. So I think anybody out there that's, listening to this podcast that might be, an inspiring filmmaker themselves, you can learn, like you said, about that program was very much film school for you at the time. Yeah. You can learn a great deal from any of the Blu-rays or DVDs that Peter Jackson releases, because, as I said, that they've often got more, even longer than his films, the behind the scenes material, and he's really detailed on that because like I said, he's a big film geek himself and loves all that stuff. So they're definitely worth checking out. I really should do a show, shouldn't I, about this?
It is a minefield out there, Keith.
It is. It's a home media minefield, indeed. But yeah, and I mean, I was lucky enough. My local cinema, they did actually get in for midnight showings and stuff. Quite a lot of Peter Jackson's films back in the day. So I was fortunate enough to see those really low budget New Zealand films that he made, like Bad Taste, etc. Projected on the big screen, and I remember being very, I mean, they're all kind of silly, but ever so amusing and entertaining and imaginative. I mean, the guy really is somewhat of a visual, filmmaker, and is very good at telling stories that way, and providing entertainment, which has, of course, led on to the career that we're about to discuss, I guess. But,
yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, also he's an inspiration to other filmmakers because, he went out there and he made Bad Taste himself. He didn't have a studio backing him. He just went out there and he did it himself, and it took him 4 years to do. Filming on weekends and, whenever people were available, and, just kept at it for 4 years. And that's a hell of a commitment.
It is.
And so, and then for it to do so well internationally, because there's never any guarantee that a film's going to do well. but you know, he put a lot of passion, a lot of heart into that first film, and you know, it's still this, you can still see it to this day, which is great. And it's just, he's built and built upon it, to the point, of course, where he went and made Lord of the Rings, which was a massive success. And,
absolutely,
you know, and sort of made him this mega director.
Yeah, no, he's certainly one of the big directors out there, making movies. Yes.
I don't know what else more to say about the guy, really. I mean, it's great that he's stayed in New Zealand. He's never had the urge to move to America, to Hollywood.
Yes.
The fact that he's worked with the same people for many years, he's been very loyal to actors and crew who've worked with him. He's started several companies, including Weta Workshop.
Yes.
And who, you know, have and helped a lot of other filmmakers get their films made.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, even though, you know, he's an Academy Award winner, etc. himself, he doesn't sort of bow or pander to the Hollywood model at all. I mean, you know, he's one of those guys. He's not comfortable wearing a tuxedo. You know, often he'll turn up at things in you know, sandals and a t-shirt or whatever. And like you said, he's very much been a pioneer of the visual effects industry. You know, establishing Weta, which work in, you know, both practical and digital effects initially, and you know, obviously he's very lucky that he's got a really good working relationship as well with his spouse, Fran Walsh, yeah, who obviously is a big fan of a lot of the materials that he likes as well, and you know, they work on the screenplays, etc. for these together. And I think, you know, what better life could you have if you're a passionate filmmaker that's able to sort of make films under your own rules, if you like, and work with the person that you share your life with in doing it. I mean, you know, he's got that enviable, fantastic balance, I think, of you know, an established career, happy family life, and you know, able to sort of keep the integrity in making what he wants to make. So you know, we can only laud him for that, I guess. Yes.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, it's great to see somebody sort of stay so humble, you know, when he, you know, could have gone down like a James Cameron route and, you know, start screaming that he's king of the world.
Hey, I like James. I can't hear, but I know what you mean. Yes, yeah. In fact, it's interesting because you know, I guess in some respects, you know, with regards to the pioneering technologies, etc., to move forward with film making, Peter Jackson is kind of in that same bracket as James Cameron or George Lucas, you know, very much so. But like you said, you know, Peter Jackson's, yeah, he certainly comes across in interviews as an incredibly humble character, and you know, really still kind of a, you know, based in his home roots, etc., which I think is nice. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. He's also, I mean, he also came along in that sort of his films that sort of came out in the sort of mid to late 90s, very much, you know, fell under that trend at the time that the likes of Cameron and Ridley Scott, etc., had, where you know, he would also release director's cuts of many of his films. So you'd get, you know, obviously the one that the studio had approved as the theatrical version, but you'd also at some point get a normally on home media, but you'd get an extended edition of his films as well, with mixed results, I might add there.
Yeah. As much as I enjoy seeing his extended cuts, I've never felt any of them were like, should have been like the theatrical cut. I think when it came to the theatrical cuts, he got it just right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is good fun to go back and like watch the extended cuts of Lord of the Rings, but I know Fellowship of the Ring, it actually suffered for being longer.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like the extra material that was put back in there for the extended cuts, because a lot of it was just repeating stuff we already seen, or just making some scenes really long. But when it came to Two Towers and Return of the King, there was some really interesting stuff. But again, I felt that the theatrical cuts were just right.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice that these are available when they come on home media, and it's great that you always are able to have both versions, rather than him saying, "Oh no, it's just the director's cut and the theatrical one isn't relevant now." That's the other good thing is he doesn't do it and sort of do it as an overwrite of the theatrical. He'll do it as a supplement to the theatrical, which I think is the way that really, as a home media collector myself, that's kind of the way I want it. I want to be a completist, so I want to have all versions of the film, not somebody telling me, "Oh, this is the definitive version and the other ones don't count anymore." No, naming no names, but you know what I mean.
Well, when it came to Lord of the Rings, they were a series of films that my whole family would go to the cinema to see every Christmas, and for those 3 years, it was great. I always look forward to the next Christmas, the next Lord of the Ring films, because at that point I was in my 20s, and family outings to the cinema non-existent. If I went to the cinema, I went with friends or hardly any family members. So for all of us to go, it was great. I mean, my dad really wanted to go and see them, and so we all went together. And we tried to do that with The Hobbit. We went to see the first one together, but it just wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same. But as I say, for 3 years there, me and my family, we went to see those films, Lord of the Ring films, each time. And it was funny because every time we went, the cinema seemed to get fuller, to the point that when we went to see Return of the King, we actually had to sit right up front because the place was packed. And my mum suffers from vertigo.
Yeah.
So all those scenes when they're attacking the Nazgul, or swooping down and attacking the White Tower. Oh, my poor mum.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the front. This is a personal opinion. This is a purely personal opinion. But I never think the front row really of any cinema is a great place to be. I have to admit, if I ever go to a film and they're running low on seats, and the only ones left are the ones in the front, I tend to say, "Oh, I'll come back and see it another day then." A bit difficult when you've got your whole family with you, though. I kind of totally appreciate.
Yeah.
So,
no, interesting you say that, because I know Ben Woodywurst would disagree with you, because I've been to the cinema with him quite a few times, and he loves sitting at the front.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, it depends on the cinema, I guess, but generally speaking.
No, he just loves that experience of being fully immersed, that your full view is just the screen, and you're up close to it. And depending on the film, I think I agree. I mean, I think I'm sort of more in the middle. I like to sit more in the middle.
Well, that's where I like to sit.
Yeah,
exactly. That's where I like to sit. I get that optimum space. Yeah.
But as I say, Ben Woodywurst loves sitting at the front. So.
Oh well, I guess if I ever go to the cinema with Ben, I'll talk to him about the film afterwards.
As you should, Keith. You should.
As you should, actually. Yeah, you should never talk
during a film.
No, I agree. Hey, you never get me doing that. Unless I'm telling someone off for talking during a film. But there you go. So, yes. But no, he has had a very interesting career, and generally speaking, a really good catalogue of movies. have come out of this guy and are still continuing to do so. So you know, good on him. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our picks then. So Keith, what was your pick for movie heaven?
Well, the clue is actually in the title for movie heaven. I've actually picked, you mentioned it briefly there, Heavenly Creatures from 1994. The reason I've chosen this one is I feel that this was a little bit of a change in his career. Up until that point, you know, the three films previously had been essentially splatter comedies. You know, they'd be there for laughs very much, and you know, and very effective and good at doing those as well. Heavenly Creatures, on the other hand, was a complete departure on this. You know, we're talking about a very, very dark, twisted tale, which, you know, even more disturbingly is based on a true story of two girls, Juliet Holm and Pauline Parker, who are close friends, who share a love of things like fantasy and literature. And I'm afraid there are spoilers in this podcast, folks. I forgot to mention at the beginning. They essentially, within the story, they get very close to one another, to the point that the parents feel quite uncomfortable about this. And one of them is actually going to move with her family to South Africa. And because of this, they actually conspire to kill Pauline's mother when she tries to, you know, stop the girls seeing each other anymore. So it's quite a dark and twisted film. It is, as I said, based on a true story that took place in New Zealand back in the 1950s. And yeah, I just thought that this was a really dark, interesting tale. The other thing about this is this was actually the debut film for Kate Winslet and Melanie Linsky. You know, two now fairly well-established actresses, especially Kate. And you know, they were very young in their career. They were in their, well, they're playing teenagers. I guess they were either in their late teens or early 20s when they made this. And you know, it was just kind of an interesting, twisted study of the psychology with these girls. It does delve into some sort of other themes as well. It delves into, you know, the sexuality of these girls and whether they are or not in fact lesbians. I mean, at the point they're 14-year-old girls when we meet them in the film, and obviously we're talking about, this was 1954. You know, at the time, New Zealand was quite conservative, and you know, this was back in the times when homosexuality was actually considered like you know, a disease, so there's something wrong with you, you know. And so it deals a little bit with that as well in terms of the girls' relationships. But the thing that really puts the Peter Jackson stamp on this, and certainly you know, where he would go with his career in the future, is the fact that these girls, you know, they very much live in a fantasy world, and we get to see this fantasy world. And this is again when he established Weta, his effects company, and we get to see you know, this world that they've created, and within this world there are lots of like plasticine looking characters, and you know, lots of visual effects that do this very convincingly. So you know, whereas many say, well, this isn't a typical Peter Jackson film, it's a lot different thematically and story wise to many of his other works, which I would agree with. You know, on the other hand, this was something where he established some of the digital special effects where he was going to go. Obviously, he'd done a lot of practical effects and splatter effects, gore effects in his previous films. But this was an experiment in some other areas there. And the other thing that I think is really notable about this film, and this was why I picked it really, was the success of this film and the acclaim of this film did lead to some of his other films actually happening, in terms of many of the collaborations with actors and producers and other people behind the scenes came out of an admiration for this film. So I think the reason it deserved picking as movie heaven was because it was something that set his career on a certain path, and also at the same time being something a little bit of a departure perhaps from some of his other work by making this a psychological drama as opposed to a fantasy film, although obviously it does, as I've mentioned, include some fantasy elements that he put in. So yeah, and you mentioned, Simon, that this was actually the first Peter Jackson film you saw. Is that right?
Yeah. I have to say I am not a big fan of this film.
Okay, no, that's fair enough.
Not a big fan of it, and I think it was the case because I saw this and then I saw the Frighteners, and I think if I hadn't seen the Frighteners, I wouldn't have been such a big Peter Jackson fan.
Mm-hmm.
I may not have gone back to see his other work, because as much as I find the story interesting and compelling and the fantasy stuff, I also found there was something about it that just didn't get me. I didn't enjoy it. And I think it's because there's so much about these girls, and then when they commit the crime at the end, when they kill the mother, I think that it just left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't.
Oh, very much. Yeah, no pun intended, eh?
To the point where I really didn't enjoy the film, and to tell the truth as well, I thought them being lesbians, I think was just a bit. It felt a bit of sensationalizing, the story. Having sort of for the podcast, sort of seen interviews, and I think very much that the two girls were just very infatuated with each other, but I don't think they were lesbians.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just, for the story's sake, they added that, and it's, I'm just not a big fan of it.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, that's that. Well, hey, I always think these podcasts are more interesting when there's a little bit of divisive opinion on stuff. I mean, in terms of leaving a bitter taste in one's mouth, I mean, that's exactly what it's designed to do. I mean, it's an absolutely appalling act that these girls have, and I think the way he handles it, because obviously the film starts where we see these girls sort of running back through the forest, having committed this act, and so they're sort of blood splattered, and we're running, and we come into this sort of, what's happened, oh dear, and then it essentially, the rest of the film sort of flashes back to when these girls met, and the journey of that year or so that they had together, and the summer that they went away with the parents, and came up with their stories and their mystery world and all this. Having both, that's the other thing that's quite good with this. It deals with classism as well, to an extent, where the two characters come from very different backgrounds. Pauline's is a very working class family, whereas Juliet's is a much more affluent family, so it deals with that. But when you actually get to the act at the end where this happens, I mean, it is, it's horrible beyond the horror of you know, just the blood and the way they do it. It's actually horrible in so much as you know. I think about how on earth could these girls do this? I mean, this is her mother, who was a decent woman. You know, there was no child abuse or anything going on here. You know, these were just normal parents raising their children in the best way they saw fit, and you know what they do is horrible.
They were going to be ripped apart.
Yeah.
They were. The parents felt that they were bad for each other, and they were. You know, because this was their reaction to being, you know, taken, you know, being pulled apart,
Yeah.
you know, separated. But again, it's sort of like, well, they didn't have to be lesbians for that to, you know, for them to feel like that.
Yeah. I mean, the whole lesbian thing. I'm not, you know, like you said, that's kind of alleged to and whatever, and it's in there as a bit of a story point. But you know, at the end of the day, so what? You know, I appreciate that's probably more of a time of a sign of A, the time when it was set, and B, perhaps the time the film was made as well. You know, whereas nowadays that's completely irrelevant and throwaway. But you know, just the fact that you know, regardless of their bond, that somebody could do this to their mother. You know, it's just, and that's the thing. The film does leave you, and maybe this is why people, you know, some people, don't, yourself included, don't like it. Is it does leave you cold. I mean, it's not one of his films that leaves you with a warm fuzzy feeling at the end by any stretch. I mean, this is dark, and this is nasty, and this, you know, actually happened. That's the thing. That's, you know, this isn't just some author's twisted, you know, fantasy in their mind, imagination. No, this actually did happen. And that makes it truly horrific. So you know, some could argue, is this a horror film? I think in many respects it is, because it, you know, what happens is absolutely horrific. But yeah, you know, I thought it was a well-made film. I mean, this was the first time, you know, that he had sort of a full-on studio type budget, because the other films were independently financed, and you know, very well made, don't get me wrong. So yeah, you know, this had support from the New Zealand Film Commission, and it ended up getting distributed by Miramax. But yeah, I just think that this is always an interesting film in his catalogue, because I feel that it does sit somewhat outside most of his films, and at the same time it did pave the way, well, for certainly his collaboration with Robert Zemeckis and Michael J. Fox, as well as, you know, certain other films as well, where they said, oh, it's the maker of Heavenly Creatures, so, you know, we're on board. So, you know, I feel it is an important film in his catalogue, whether you personally like it or not. I think it was definitely worth mention.
Right. I just want to talk about the narrative device that this story uses, and you brought it up about showing the end at the beginning. Yes. And then we work back to that. I have to say, I'm becoming not a big fan of that. And I think because a lot of the time it doesn't make if you know what the destination is, sometimes the journey isn't that interesting.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So I've been seeing quite a few films lately where they use this device, and I don't. Again, like any sort of narrative device, it depends on how well you use it. But it's this, you know, again, it's just like showing the end of the story at the beginning. I feel a lot of, I think for me sometimes I find that the director doesn't have much faith in their story if they need to open with this, you know, oh, this big shocker, look, this is you know, look what's happened here, and we're gonna make our way there. But what do you think about this narrative device?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a big, you know, because there are some films that it works beautifully in, and there's some films that, you know, not so well. And obviously, you know, while we're recording this now in 2018, you know, this is a narrative device that's been used an awful lot. And you know, and I've got to say, I've made short films and I've written a feature script where I'm not going to lie, I use a similar narrative device. I think one of the reasons that it gets used is because of the whole, you know, and I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent because this is kind of a whole nother podcast about, you know, script writing and, you know, narrative theory and all that stuff. But you know, if you read a lot of books or listen to a lot of you know, people about script writing, whether it's Sid Field, Robert McKee, you know, whoever, you know, the ones out there, they often talk about to grab the, if you're putting out a script for spec, you know, to a studio or a production company, you know, to grab their attention on the first page, you know, they say about, you know, your script needs to have a running start and needs to sort of plunge you straight into the action. So as a result, I think often people will put some sort of inciting event or climatic event, in this case, right at the beginning of their script to sort of draw someone in, and then we'll backtrack and sort of go, you know, and bring us up to speed. And I think that's perhaps why it happens quite often, maybe. But, you know, hey, you know, films don't need to be told in a linear fashion, and sometimes they're bookended this way. So, you know.
Yeah. I don't have anything against that. I just feel that sometimes when watching a story, you feel that sort of opening does it a disservice.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there are many examples of films where that opening actually, you know, it works, because the end of the day, when you get to the ending, it's sort of a twist.
Yeah, well, those are I mean, the really clever ones. And sorry, I haven't sort of, because I didn't know you were going to ask this, I haven't sort of put any thought into having some examples here, but you know, the ones that are really clever are the ones that show you something like this and you think, yeah, okay, so that's how it's going to end. And then when you get to the actual point where it catches up with itself, you know, it's actually a twist on that, and it's not what you've thought all along. And you know, those are the really clever ones, aren't they? But
well, they can. I mean, like any film, some twists you can see coming a mile off.
Yeah, you can, and you know, and I do like. I mean, we've talked on other podcasts about, you know, unconventional narratives in films, and they're you know, they're usually the more interesting ones. But you know, essentially, apart from that sort of cold opening that they throwed on there, you know, this does take a linear narrative like any film. But yeah, I mean, who knows? I don't know. I've not. This is one of the few films where there isn't a lot of supplemental material, opposite to what I was saying at the beginning about how most of his films does. This is one of the rare occasions where the home media releases, and indeed, you know, the latest Blu-rays and everything, it's hard to find any sort of commentaries or behind the scenes on this. You know, it's possible. I'm not saying it's happened. It's possible that maybe the distributor or the studio you know, had some influence there and said, look, you know, this film takes too long to get going. You know, and we need to have some action at the start to draw people in, and maybe, you know, that was done editorially then because of that. I don't know. I don't know is the answer.
No, I don't think so. I mean, from watching it, it certainly feels like it's kind of like part of the storytelling, because you hear because when you have the opening with the sort of tourist video,
yes,
or tourist
the Christchurch tourist video, yeah,
tourist video, you hear the sound of the girl screaming near the end of it.
You do, yeah,
and it feels like it's part of it.
Yeah, but I don't have a problem with it.
Do you think it works?
Yeah. I mean, I've not really. I don't have a major problem with it, but at the same time, I think it's an interesting point that you raise, and well, like I jokingly often say, we literally could have a whole another podcast about these sort of narrative traits, etc. But yeah, in this instance, I don't really have a problem with it. I think it works for the film, and I enjoy the film, I'm okay with it. But at the same time, I can totally understand why you might not have been a fan. And it is, I have to say, it is an odd film to have as an introduction to Peter Jackson. If I was saying to people, "Oh, go out and watch Peter Jackson's work," I wouldn't necessarily suggest that they start with Heavenly Creatures. I'd suggest that they start with Bad Taste, and go right back to the beginning and work through. But this one is definitely it's probably this and The Lovely Bones are the two films in his catalogue that are, even though they have fantasy elements, but they are slightly darker and slightly different films than the rest of them, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I haven't seen Lovely Bones, but I've never heard anything good about it.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I know people who love it, and I know people who hate it, and I'm on this podcast we're not going there, but it's an interesting film. Yeah.
As a companion piece to this one, because there are similar stories, they are about a crime and they involve a fantasy element.
Yes.
Do you think it's a good companion to this film, or completely different?
It's I would say there's a kinship to them in terms of Jackson's body of work, but they are still completely separate things. But I suppose if you were saying to me, if I had to group his films together, I guess that you could perhaps put them under a similar bracket. Indeed, yeah. Yeah, check it out. I don't know. It's another one. It's another one that causes a lot of debate.
Yes. Right. Well, moving on.
But it certainly wasn't. It certainly wouldn't have been my movie Heaven. So that's why I didn't pick that one.
Right. Okay.
Your one, on the other hand, I believe I did pick it, right, and then we changed it. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Well, my pick for movie Heaven is his follow-up film in '96, The Frighteners.
Yay!
And as Keith said, it was produced by Robert Zemeckis, and this time he got to work with a Hollywood star in the shape of Michael J. Fox. He got a whole load of actors to come over and make New Zealand look like America.
Yeah. New Zealand became small town America. Absolutely.
That's right.
And I have to say, you say about Michael J. Fox, what a great performance by Michael J. Fox in this film. This is often not talked about in Michael J. Fox's career, but I actually think this is one of the highlights, I would say, because it's a very different character to what he usually plays, isn't it? Very much.
Well, yeah, even when he's playing somebody who's a bit unlikable, usually there's still a lot of, the Michael J. Fox charm to it. But in this case, he is playing somebody who is a bit of an arsehole. And he is a con artist, and he is, trying to make money out of people. So if you don't know what The Frighteners is, it's... Michael J. Fox plays a character called Frank Bannister, and he says he is a paranormal investigator, exterminator. He can come in and remove spirits from people's houses. What people don't know is that because he can see ghosts, he has these 3 ghosts who work for him, who you know, go into these houses and start causing trouble, and then he can come in and clean up and make money. But of course, what happens is then suddenly people start dying, and Michael J. Fox's character is the only one that can see that there's this sort of spectre character, this Grim Reaper character going around killing people, and he can see who's going to be next because there's a number sort of inflamed on their head. And he sees that this girl that he really likes is going to be next, and he does everything in his power to try and stop it. And then we, of course, learn about this dark history of the town, about these 2 psychopaths who went on a killing spree, and even though one of them is dead, still wants to continue this killing spree. It's, you know, it's beautifully, it's really well done. It's funny. It has its moments of horror, and it's also kind of heartwarming as well, because at the end of the day, the Frank Bannister character, you know, gets to redeem himself, because he is a victim in this as well. His wife was killed in a roadside accident, and he thought that was his own fault, but it turned out it wasn't. Turns out that his wife was another victim of these psychopaths. But yeah, it's a wonderful film, and it's kind of interesting. Having watched the Blu-ray, there's an introduction by Peter Jackson, and he said this is the first time he used you know, CGI in a film.
Yes.
And he had to build a company, and afterwards, after the film was finished, he was like, well, I've got this company now, what do I do next with it? And he went round and he said, well, obviously I need a film with lots of effects in it, maybe fantasy. And he cites this film as the fact that he went after making Lord of the Rings so that he could use his CGI company.
And the rest is history. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of all the things, it's like, oh no, I love the story, I've always wanted to make it, now I've got a company, I just got to use them in something.
Well, hey, you know what a great journey that is.
Yes.
I mean, I have to admit, you know, this was my, if you like, my original pick for Heaven. Yeah, I mean, this is a great film. I own that Blu-ray, which I have to say, you know, not only has it got 2 versions of the film, it's got the theatrical and the extended cut, but it's also got a no less than 4-hour documentary, right from the concept in early talks right the way through the post, you know, the release, the whole journey of the film. And you see some of the, you know, which were at the time groundbreaking effects that Weta that worked on, you know, with this. And, you know, it's really, you can see Peter Jackson's passion for it. And, yeah, it's again, any filmmakers out there, that's well worth a watch, to watch that behind the scenes as well as obviously the film. But yeah, you know, it really is heavily detailed on how they pulled this off. And what's kind of interesting is obviously, you know, this got, again, Zemeckis took notice of Jackson because of Heavenly Creatures. Likewise, Michael J. Fox, you know, agreed to read it, having seen Heavenly Creatures. But you know, initially they were thinking of this as a one of the spin-off films for the Tales from the Crypt. And
okay,
you know, they decided no, actually, this would actually be a really good, you know, film in its own right. So hence why Zemeckis, you know, decided to produce it as a separate from the Tales from the Crypt series that he was also working on. It's just got some great performances, and one of the things that he did on this, which I think is quite interesting as well, is in order to make it funny, he and Fran, they wrote the script and they worked on it, but they wanted to allow a lot of these actors that they brought in to bring some of their their comic timing, etc., that they naturally had. So they did a series of improvisational read-throughs basically with the cast. But what was quite funny is he didn't have the man with all the gadgets, right, didn't have an audio recorder, right? So he basically took a VHS-C camcorder and put it on the floor and recorded just the audio. And it's quite funny because you just basically see a cup of tea on the carpet and somebody's feet, while they're working out all these different lines and gags and stuff. So I always say that's quite funny. This man didn't have a tape recorder. Obviously, this was before you could record it on your iPhone. Back in the days of 96 or 95, I guess, when they were doing this.
I must admit, I had quite an elaborate setup when I recorded a read through of a cast, and I had a laptop and a microphone, and so I went a little to town with it. But
there you go. You were even more professional than Peter Jackson. Go figure that. But, one of the things. I mean, there's some great supporting actors in this as well, and like the ghosts and stuff. I mean, they came out with some brilliant lines and stuff that, like I said, a lot of it they worked in those sort of early read-throughs and stuff. So they really, that just goes to show you as well, the whole how important it is to be able to flesh out the script by using the cast that you've got around you, to improve on things, and they certainly did. Shay McBride's stuff is hilarious. He played Cyrus, and that he loves improvisation. That guy, and there's some really funny stuff on that Blu-ray.
Well, the other thing as well is that John Austen is unrecognizable as the judge.
Totally.
I mean, the makeup job on it was so great because he had his jawbone kept falling out or was loose all the time. So it was just it was great to see that. As you mentioned before about extended cuts, this is actually one of those extended cuts is not very good. They added a couple of scenes which don't really add much to the story.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. It's more it feels like padding as opposed to
and hence why they took it out. I mean, it's interesting to see, but maybe as a deleted scene, and then that actually being put back in.
Yeah, but no, it's very enjoyable. Comedy horror. It almost feels like it's the following decades. Ghostbusters, in some respects, and he gets to play a really interesting character, and it's kind of sad because I believe that this was probably his last leading role in a feature film, because he went back to television after this, didn't he, with Spin City?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And then obviously, got diagnosed with Parkinson's shortly after that. So it's kind of sad that this was his sort of last leading man Hollywood feature film, as it were. But yeah, I really enjoyed watching Michael J. Fox in this because there was a lot going on with this character, and like you said, it was different to see him play someone who isn't initially as likable, but because it's Michael J. Fox, there's still something likable and relatable to it.
Yes. Oh yeah. Well, because at the end of the day, he tries to do the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, this obviously was like you've already said, this was the sort of film that established the production company and the Weta digital effects company, and you know, kind of he had all of his sort of people in place to sort of move on to other, as he would say, projects, you know, and move forward with them. And, you know, largely that was because of the success of this project. So yeah, yes. Good stuff. And a really good choice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing I love about this film as well is that the scene near the end where Michael J. Fox's character gets to experience the murders. So the Ghostal Spectre character, at first we think is like a killer of ghosts, but it turns out actually he was a serial killer. And him and his girlfriend, they went around killing people in a hospital ward. And they were trying to outdo sort of other serial killers, hence why the numbers. They would carve numbers in people's foreheads and stuff. But Michael J. Fox gets to experience that actual attack happen, you know, when he is actually at the hospital. And it's done really well, because it's in the middle of a chase scene. They're being chased, and yet he's having these flashbacks as well as trying to, you know, avoid his pursuer. It's really well done.
Yeah, it's nicely edited and put together. It works really well. No, I agree. You know, I mean, for me, you know, as I said, 92, 93, whenever it was, I was watching, you know, Bad Taste and Brain Dead, etc., and you know, starting to think about, oh, you know, I want to learn filmmaking. You know, am I going to go to film school? And when this one came out, I was actually in film school, so it was kind of it was really nice to see you know, this guy, this low budget Australian filmmaker. Sorry, Australian. He'd hate it if I said that. Low budget New Zealand filmmaker had you know, kind of now made it you know, into the Hollywood mainstream, and was able to do films like this, and you know, and the likes of Bob Zemeckis and whatever were taking him you know, seriously as well. So that was really good to see. And I hadn't actually watched this in quite some years, so it was really nice to sort of go back and revisit it on Blu-ray and check it out again. But yeah, it was really good, really nice film.
Yeah, that's a good film, well worth checking out.
Yeah, and like I said, anyone listening to this that wants to watch really good behind the scenes stuff that just isn't just an EPK type thing, the Jackson produced behind the scenes on this is well, probably more in depth than it needs to be, but it's really good. As I said, it has a runtime of 4 hours, but you can watch it in chunks. You know, they break it up into like sort of development and pre-production, production, post-production, and then release. So you can break it up into chunks, but it's well worth a watch. Really clever to see how they did some of those early CG effects.
Yes, yeah, and you know, it still looks good now. I mean, some of the effects hasn't aged too well, but you know, that's.
Yeah, I think it holds up.
That's the thing about.
I don't know, and that's just nostalgia.
That's the thing about CGI.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you can kind of get away with it to a certain extent because we're dealing with sort of spectral-looking images, you know, ghosts and whatever. And yeah, I feel it sort of works. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Moving on. It's now time for our picks of movie hell. Oh dear. So Keith, what is your pick for movie hell?
Well, you know, has Peter Jackson really made a bad movie? you know, I'd almost sort of caveat by saying, not really. But as he made a film that personally, you know, I don't think's great for various reasons, and you know, yes, I've picked something for that. As anyone who's a sort of regular listener of this podcast will probably know, often a lot of my picks are somewhat loaded, and they are so that we can either talk about other aspects of cinema or filmmaking or genres or franchises or whatever. I guess I've kind of done a little bit of that here, but it is very honest because I base this on my initial experience when I first saw this at the cinema, and I've since obviously for this podcast watched it again on Blu-ray, and my opinion is still exactly the same. So I have picked King Kong from 2005. Basically, I'm a fan of the King Kong franchise, very much so. And Peter Jackson is a huge fan of the original, the 1933 King Kong film. And, you know, like I've kind of used this analogy before, but to an extent, I think there lies the problem. Okay, the Merian Cooper, David Selznick original film from 1933 was one of the first films Peter Jackson watched on TV when he was a kid, about 8 years old, I think he says, when he tells the story. And it was one of the films that inspired him to become a filmmaker. So it's a very seminal film. It's the film that kind of made Peter Jackson who he is today. So, you know, he had massive love and massive respect for this film. But when we sort of get into talking about it, I think sometimes that might have been part of the problem here. Obviously, the original film, you know, I know this is not a podcast about that, but, you know, it is, I think, an absolutely incredible film. It's definitely one of the history of movie greats. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, Willis O'Brien's stop motion work was what then, you know, inspired and shaped the career of Ray Harryhausen. And I often mention that, you know, a big fan of his work through the years when I was growing up. And obviously, they made a version. Dino De Laurentiis made a version in 1976, which starred Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange, and it was basically it was slightly adapted. It was contemporized. It was around a search for oil initially, rather than, you know, a guy trying to make a movie. And you know, that film they used sort of a mixture of animatronic type effects and a guy in a suit, essentially.
And it looked like a guy in a suit.
Yeah. I mean, you know, a lot of people really kind of hate that film. Again, it's another one I remember watching on TV when I was very young. You know, on like a Saturday afternoon or something, and I kind of liked it actually as a kid. You know. As an adult, there's Jessica Lange. But anyway, sorry. But you know, what they did with that was they tried to do something where they essentially used the same story, the same basic setup, the same idea, but tried to do something slightly different with it and contemporize it. And of course, they used effects of the time, you know, to make that one. So instead of using the stop motion like they'd done in 1933, they decided, like I've already said, to do sort of a mixture of animatronic puppets and a man in a suit. And then obviously we get to Peter Jackson by 2005, who'd sort of, you know, had mastered with the Lord of the Rings films, etc. Had mastered the CGI and the mixture of that with performance and motion capture. So we're telling the story again. Essentially, the background is it's set in 1933 New York. We've got an overly ambitious movie producer who's played by Jack Black in this film, and he coerces his cast and hires a ship to travel to this mysterious Skull Island to encounter Kong, a giant ape who he immediately becomes smitten with his leading lady, who is a vaudeville actress called Anne Darrow, which in this film is played by Naomi Watts. And essentially it involves them capturing the Kong creature and bringing them back to New York, where it appears as what they call the eighth wonder of the world, and all sorts of crazy stuff follows. So
yes, including ice skating.
Including ice skating, yeah. So okay, so why have I got a problem with this film? Well, okay, little bit of history on it first. Back after the success of the Frighteners, so it's kind of weird, we are going almost chronological here. After the success of the Frighteners in 96, Universal came to Peter Jackson, and they basically offered him a choice of a remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon or a remake of King Kong. And obviously, him being an absolutely mega fan of King Kong, so much so that he had actually made a Super 8 film as a kid, where he'd made his own stop motion puppet of Kong, and tried to sort of create a film as a sort of sequel almost to Kong. Even as a kid, instantly jumped at the chance to remake King Kong, and they did a draft back in 1996, which was much different to what we ended up with. It was much more of a old school Hollywood action film, and many people say that it was actually the script that inspired the Stephen Sommers remake of The Mummy. Okay, it was much more similar to that in terms of storyline, tone, etc. And then what happened is the Godzilla film that had been made by Roland Emmerich at the time had been a bit of a box office disaster. And as a result, Universal decided to pull the plug on the King Kong project, which is what then led to Peter Jackson going on his Lord of the Rings journey, which is absolutely a whole another series of podcasts probably, so I won't go into that, but that's so he took a break from the idea of doing the King Kong film and went and did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which obviously took up a decade of doing those films. And once those had all been made and released and hugely successful, yeah, he then went back to Kong. But
can I just draw you up on something? You said that Lord of the Rings took a decade to make. It didn't take a decade to make, because 96 was Frighteners, and the Fellowship of the Ring came out in 2001.
Yeah, okay. Well, he took the decade between that and King Kong coming out. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Right.
Sorry, I wasn't meaning to be absolutely precise. Sorry, but yes, he took. No. But
it just sounded like it took a whole decade to make. Lord
I kind of mean that King Kong was shelved for a decade. Sorry, that was me. I'm not explaining myself properly. Sorry. It's because my mind. I do this. I waffle on. My mind goes ahead of my what I'm saying, and then I end up paraphrasing and stuff doesn't make sense. And you've no idea how many of these I've listened back to and absolute cringed at shit that I've said and stuff that I've got wrong. So errors and omissions, folks. Apologies. There
you go.
Anyway, so we get to the point where he's then ready to make a King Kong film, and he decides to go back to this original story with the original setting and original characters. Okay, so which, let's do a modern remake. It's been a long time since the 1933 film. Technology has moved on. We can now do it in the world of digital and CGI. performance capture. So why not? You know, this all sounds great. My problems with it is, so he makes it, but he literally makes it double the length of the original film. So he hasn't done a Gus Van Sant and done a Psycho and essentially done a shot-for-shot remake. He has taken the same story and the same characters and made a remake. But instead of the tight 100 minutes that the original 1933 one was and worked beautifully, the normal theatrical cut of this is 3 hours, 10 minutes with an extended cut with an additional, I think, 11 or 12 minutes on top of that, right? Now, here, again, I might not be precise, but approximately that, yeah? Now, here comes the problem. We're talking far too long and far too self-indulgent, okay? I definitely don't have a problem with long movies. I've often mentioned one of my favourite movies is Dances with Wolves, which is a long film. So I don't have a problem with long movies if it works for the story. But this isn't a TV show. This isn't a mini-series. This is a movie that, in my opinion, is just way too long and way too self-indulgent. It's an hour and 10 minutes into the film before we actually see the titular King Kong. There is an awful lot of setup in New York, setting up the ensemble of characters that take the ship to Skull Island. There's a lot more expansion on the Anne Darrow character, you know, as a struggling vaudeville actress that can't afford to eat in the sort of depression period of the Prohibition period of New York, this is, I guess, good character background. So I'm not going to knock that, but it does take an awful long time to actually get to the island and for some action to happen. Once we actually get there, again, they've really played on the original concepts of this being an island filled with, it's not only got Kong on it, but it's got other sort of prehistoric type creatures running around. And this is where I start to have a real problem with it now. We get to, obviously a decade earlier, more than a decade earlier, Jurassic Park had been made, and we've talked about that on other podcasts. And what an amazing recreation of dinosaurs for the big screen that totally works. What we get here is, I can't fault, again, the digital effects, etc., are great, but the drama and the acting and the things around it, for me, are unbelievable. So we get a situation where our film crew are on the island. This Kong has taken Anne. He's become fascinated with Anne, as he has in all of the films, and he's taken her away. And the crew have decided to go in and find her and rescue her. But in doing so, they come across a herd, if that's the correct collective for of dinosaurs, and there's basically they get chased by them. And this is where they really lost me here, because nobody at this point of the film gets crushed by a dinosaur, or they're running in between their legs and they're carrying cameras and equipment and they're making one-liners. And I just kind of, I didn't care about a lot of these characters either. That was another thing. I felt very removed from the characters. For some reason, I almost feel like there was so much attention spent on making the visual effects extremely good, which they are, that it kind of almost took away from the drama and the acting. I don't know why, but for me it felt odd. Then we go through again similar beats from the original film between Kong and Anne Darrow, which again is played wonderfully. At the wonderful Andy Serkis, who often gets a mention on this podcast, you know, did a wonderful job having worked with Peter Jackson as Gollum. Peter Gollum is Jackson. No, having worked as Gollum on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, and you know, using him again now to bring life to Kong, you know, does so very well. And we get a great scene where in this film, again, slightly overindulgent, but in the original, Kong fights a T-Rex. In this film, he fights 3 T-Rexes to protect her. And, you know, eventually they manage to rescue Anne and chloroform Kong, because this boat had a load of chloroform on it. And then we don't actually see how they managed to get Kong back to New York, but it then jumps back to New York, where Kong has become, you know, a media show for I'm trying to think of Jack Black's character's name. It's Cooper, isn't it? Or no, it's Denham. Yeah, and he's become, you know, the 8th wonder of the world, and you know, a big marketing, expensive ticket show. And of course, you know, Kong gets loose, causes absolute havoc in New York, you know, killing lots of people in the process, attempting to find Anne. And when he does find her, it's like suddenly all this chaos in New York, suddenly New York is deserted, and they go for a little ice skating time on the frozen lake in Central Park. And it does feel very odd and very, very weird, and very much like it shouldn't be there. And doesn't last for very long before the military are in, and they are indeed chasing Kong, and they pursue Kong, who has Anne with him. And as with the original 1933 version, they end up the World Trade Center. Sorry, the Empire State Building. Let me get this right. I'm thinking remake, which isn't there. Yeah, no, up the Empire State Building. And again, this is where I get a little bit of a problem with all of this again, because they're at the top of the Empire State Building. You know, Naomi Watts is in a beautiful white dress and high heels. Obviously, I know it's stylized. I know it's a film. I know she's supposed to look glamorous. She does through the whole thing. But she stood on the top of the Empire State Building, and I don't believe that she's on the top of the Empire State Building. Why? Because she stood there and there's no fear. There's no hanging on to anything. It just feels very unbelievable to me. And I had a real problem with that when I first watched it, and I had a problem when I watched it again. And it's interesting because on the Ultimate Edition Blu-ray that you can get, which has got both cuts of the film, and it's got literally hours and hours of bonus materials. I think it's somewhere up in the region of 14 hours of bonus content, has a very, very immersive documentary, which I've not watched all of, but I've watched some of. And early on their location scouting, they were allowed to go up to the top of the Empire State Building. And, you know, they go to the top of it, and Naomi Watts can barely stand up. She's practically on her hands and knees because of the vertigo. I'm like, why didn't she go back to some of that memory? You know, again, I know it's a movie, and I get it, and there's probably people screaming at this podcast now, going, "Keith, get over yourself. It's a movie. Don't be ridiculous," and all this. But I don't know what it was. There's something about this film I can't put my finger on. It's well made. It's well done. It looks fantastic, but I have a problem with it. You know, I was really excited to go and see it because I'm a big fan of the original King Kong movies. And I was really excited to see this. I knew it was Peter Jackson's passion project. Well, apart from Lord of the Rings, I guess, but you know, it was one of his passion projects for sure. And I was really excited to go and see it. I had enjoyed the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I went thinking that I was going to really enjoy this, and it left me cold. And I sat down, you know, having picked it, as I thought, well, if I pick it for movie hell, it's an excuse to talk about the King Kong franchise. And I rewatched it thinking, will I be eating my words? And I'm not. I rewatched it and it was too long and I felt cold. So, you know, hate me or not, listeners, this is my pick, I'm afraid, for Peter Jackson's movie hell.
And I no disagreement here. I remember going to cinema to see this, thinking, "Oh, follow up to Lord of the Rings is going to be good," and it was very long. It drags as well, and it's a film that it could have done with a lot of trimming, and I think it would have been a better film for it. I think some of the stuff in it that's quite memorable. It was actually nice to see Andy Serkis in the flesh.
Yes, yeah.
Even though we all knew he was doing the mo-capture for King Kong, it was actually nice to see him as part of one of the crew. And he had the most horrible-less death in the whole film.
Yeah, very much so.
With the tube worms.
Yeah, that stuff is nasty.
It's very nasty, and I still sort of remember it to this day, you know. And but yeah, it's just I know when he set out to make this remake that there was things that he wanted to do which were planned for the original King Kong, but they couldn't do because of the technology. And I think there's one scene that's, I don't know if it's missing or it was attempted to be shot, called the spider pit.
Yes, which
became this pit where Andy Serkis's character died with these tube worms and stuff like that. There's stuff in it that, you know, you think if you take that out, it still could be quite an interesting film. It still could be really good.
Well, interestingly, that pit scene on on one of the special edition Blu-rays of the 33 King Kong, Peter Jackson and Weta actually recreated that scene in stop motion with practical effects, shot with the old style camera, as a sort of, because of their love of it. The only thing was, they said they'd never put it into the original film, but they'd have it as a supplemental on the Blu-ray. Right. And they've done an amazing job of that. It is incredible. And this is the thing, you know, I almost think that, you know, he loves the original film so much that he wanted to put so much into this that he wasn't able to be objective about it. So hence why it is overlong, it is self-indulgent, and I guess because he wanted to make it in the start, using the latest technology, but make it in the style of like a sort of older classic Hollywood movie, maybe that's why the performances feel a bit more stilted, or even over the top in places, and maybe that's why, you know, there's that unbelief. There's that we've talked before about the whole uncanny valley thing, and the problem I have with the Empire State Building scene, it's not Kong. Kong looks fantastic. It's not the airplanes. The airplanes look fantastic. I have a problem with the whole believability of her being on the top of the Empire State Building, because at sunrise, by the way, so I've no idea what time that the show that they were going to put on was going to be, but you know, the timeline there all seems a bit odd as well. But I don't know, I'm really annoyed, because you know when you kind of want to like something and you don't, and then you want to give a really good, inspired, intelligent reason as to why you don't like it, but you can't. Well, that's exactly what I feel like with this. I feel that I'm not, you know, I'm possibly contradicting myself. I'm not explaining it right. I really, and I have thought hard about what is it about this that I don't like, and and I'm trying to rationalize it, and it's really hard because I don't, you know, I see the passion that's in it. I think it's incredibly well made. I think they use the technology in an incredible way to recreate this classic story. You know, it's all there, but for me, it just doesn't work, and I don't know why. I can't put my finger on it, but I thought, well, we could have a discussion around it in any case. But you know,
well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it could have done with being updated. I mean, it didn't have to be so faithful. You know, I think if you're going to do a remake, bring something new to it, and not just it being technology.
I mean, I didn't have a problem with it being a period piece. That wasn't the problem.
But I'm saying he was so loyal to the original film that he, you know, as you say, it's self-indulgent. It's too long. You know, it gets the whole stuff gets stretched.
Yeah,
and as you say, you know, you have all this stuff on the boat, sort of, you know, for us to get to know these characters before they get to the island, but it does make it feel like them getting to the island takes forever, and then what you have then is, you know, once Kong is subdued, they're back in New York like that.
Yeah, exactly. With,
you know, but then again, we don't want to see the stuff where they're journeying back to New York, trying to chloroform him all the way,
trying to get him back to the boat for starters. It's like
that'd be an even longer film. We don't want that. I mean, it's long enough as it is.
It is.
It's a bit of a you know, a trod. You know, it's just so long, and there's so much spectacle you can take before you start getting bored.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you agree with me. I was expecting you to put me to my rights on this one, because I know lots of people love it, and I totally respect that. But you know, in terms of what ifs, I almost wonder the original film that he was going to make after Frighteners. You know, I often wonder what would have been like if he hadn't have got the brakes put on it and then gone off to make Lord of the Rings. If he'd made that film, what would that have been? Because from the sounds of it, that was something that was taking the concept and doing their own thing on it. A little bit like, and this is a whole nother podcast, so I won't dwell on this, but, you know, Kong Skull Island, which came out last year, which again, you know, is by no means a perfect movie in any way. I know it's got some sort of tonal shifts and problems and stuff, but I really enjoyed that in so much as they took the Kong idea, they put it in a different you know, time period setting, and they did something different with it. And we still got some iconography, you know, fighting with other dinosaurs, etc., and all of that sort of thing. But they kept it contained to the island. And, you know, I just thought that for me, I thought that was an interesting new spin on the character. And I quite enjoyed it, even though I know a lot of people hate it, and I'm not saying it was without problems, but I quite enjoyed that. And I almost wonder, you know, if Peter Jackson had made something again that used the concepts of the character and the basic premise, but just did something different with it, whether or not it would have been a more satisfying film rather than a homage.
And also the fact he just come off this massive project called Lord of the Rings.
That tiny film,
that tiny film, and he went straight into doing King Kong. And I remember, because they did a whole series of on-set videos for the internet.
Yes,
I remember he looked awful. He lost a lot of weight, and he looked really skinny and ill. And I think personally, he needed to have had a bit of a break between doing Lord of the Rings and King Kong, because I think he went straight from one into the other without no break.
Right.
And I think his health suffered for it, and I think his judgment suffered for it as well. I think it's a very long film, which didn't need to be.
Yeah. I mean, I believe it was commercially successful, I think.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And
I think it did well. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got Kong Skull Island, and I think Universal, they made their money.
Yeah, well, they're trying to do their shared universe thing with this as well now, aren't they? the Godzilla tie-in and stuff like that. But every studio wants a shared universe franchise now. Yeah,
they do indeed. And there was a lot of good faith there, because Lord of the Rings were really good, and they were great films, and so we were expecting the same from Peter Jackson when it came to King Kong, and maybe our expectations were way too high for this film.
Yeah, and like you said, he did those he used the internet to do those regular video diaries, which are also on the Blu-ray and the 4K UHD. You get those. And what I do like about Peter Jackson as well is I do like the fact that he has a sense of humor, because on one of them they talk about the fact that there are 2 sequels in the works. I forget what they're called. They've got ridiculous titles, but there's 2 sequels, and they interview all the cast and the effects people and the crew about this sequel, and everybody's like really serious about it, and you think, oh really? And apparently they were scheduled to be out in like 2009 and 2011 or something. But then the date that he put that up was on the 1st of April. So it was a big, like a joke, April Fool thing. But, I love the fact that, he had the sense of humour to go and make one of these video production diaries and for everybody to be in on the joke and, take it really seriously. So suddenly you think this is going to be part of a trilogy and it's complete nonsense. But he could have almost done, though, with telling this story as a trilogy. It might have worked, have them, one, or at least one film in Skull Island and then another one back in New York, rather than trying to cram it all into one film. Who knows? I don't know.
No, because we get more scenes of Kong ice skating. They got to fill out that. Was that
time. Me, or was that? You see, to me that whole thing made no sense and felt really odd, because suddenly you had chaos as he was going through New York, knocking down buildings and treading on people and destroying everything in his path, sort of thing. And then he sees her and suddenly New York's empty. There's not a passing car or anything. And it just, it felt like a really odd beat to me. And I'm like, maybe I've missed the point of this or something. But that did seem weird.
Yes. Yeah.
But there's obviously there's loads to talk about Kong and the franchise and this movie and the different versions and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, what I say to people is don't listen to me waffle on and get half my facts incorrect. Just bloody go out, get the. I actually picked up the Ultimate Edition Blu-ray of this for £5, right? And it has one Blu-ray with both versions of the movie on it that looks fantastic, by the way. But both versions, although I wouldn't recommend anybody sit through the longer version, but I did. And then it's got another disc, as I said, literally filled with, I think it's 14 hours of bonus content. Again, everything, a bit like the Frighteners one, everything from the early discussions and the development right the way through the production process, and it's really in depth. So it's well worth, for anyone who's a big film geek of this stature would do well to listen to it or watch it. Indeed. Right, moving on. Yes, that's my pick for movie night. Are we going to agree on this one, Simon? That's the question.
I think we are. I think most people agree, because at the time when this came out, I think people were, a little fed up with this. So, my pick for movie hell is The Hobbit, and I've picked The Battle of the Five Armies.
Ah, okay, yes.
Yes. So, 2012, I was quite looking forward to seeing The Hobbit. I think I had reservations about the fact that they had split it into 3 films, and also the fact that Guillermo del Toro was attached to the project and left. I think he left because of creative differences, and Peter Jackson had to step back in and direct these. And it did feel like the studios were like, well, let's repeat some magic. Let's light up those box office with more Hobbits, and let's go back and let's do The Hobbit. Now the thing is, to turn such a small book into 3 films, you have to invent a lot of stuff. But unfortunately, in the case of these films, it did seem to be treading old water. So I went to see The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey at the cinema with my parents. I think my brother came along. It wasn't the whole family this time, but we went, and we went Christmas Eve. And we came out and we were a bit, yeah, it was all right. Yeah. And it felt like a retread of Fellowship of the Ring. I mean, the fact that you get a group of Middle Earthers together, at this time mostly dwarves, and they go to Riverdale, and then they get trapped on a mountain, and then they have to fight some enemies at the end, and then they're sort of off into the next part. And it was like, oh, okay, this is very familiar. It's like deja vu, but everybody seems to be a lot shorter. And then came Desolation of Smaug, which was all right. It was all right. I think once they got into the under the mountain and they went up against the dragon, I thought that bit was really good. But the sort of the lead up to it was a bit. And then finally you had the Battle of the Five Armies, which it just felt like people were going through the motions to get this thing finished. Now, one of the problems I have about these prequels is that in Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf discovers that Bilbo has the Ring of Power, well, he doesn't realise it's the Ring of Power, but he realises there's something wrong about this ring that Bilbo has. He goes off and he sort of, he researches it, and he finds, this, back in the histories, these words, my precious, a phrase that, as soon as you say it, just as Lord of the Rings. At that point, that it didn't feel like he knew that Sauron was, coming back into the world. It looked like he had, when he went to the Black Gates and saw that there was a lot going on in Mordor. It was like, oh my god, the ancient enemies come back. But with these prequels, they've gone up against the ancient enemy. They've had this Battle of the Five Armies, so they surely should have been quite prepared for it. I know Saruman goes, I will now go deal with him, and of course we all know he becomes a double-crosser and stuff like that. But it felt like a cash grab. I mean, yeah, The Hobbit should have been a good film. And as Guillermo del Toro says, there's a point in the book that when it leaves it open to being a 2-parter, but to extend it to 3 parts, I mean, no, it didn't work.
Yeah,
I mean, it was it was like I went to see Desolation of Smaug with my girlfriend, and then when it came to this one, we looked at each other and went, we ain't gonna bother.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it didn't help that they also tried to do this experiment with a different frame rate.
I'm glad you went there, because I was going to talk about that. Yeah.
You remember? It was 60 frames per second, wasn't it?
Yeah. 24. I think it was 60.
60.
It's either 48 or 60. I can't remember. Maybe it was 48.
Oh, it might have been. It might have been 48.
I think it was. HFR. They were calling it in the cinemas. High frame rate. Yes. I think it was 48 frames per second and 3D at that, because of course this was in the right in the middle of the whole 3D craze, wasn't it? So yes.
And the thing was, I remember it was finding it so difficult just to watch the film normally, just to get a ticket to go and see the film 2D. And when we did, once I finally got that ticket, we were in the smallest screen possible. I was like, oh, thanks. You know, this made me feel like, you know, being, you know, relegated, because I actually just wanted to see it normally projected. I didn't want to see it high frame rate. I didn't want to see it in 3D. And of course, everybody complained about it, to the point that, you know, when it came to the next film, they dropped it like a stone.
Yeah. I mean, because I always like to see these, you know, these developments in cinema. So I did actually go and see. I believe it was the second one that I saw in HFR 3D, and I didn't like it, because for me. I kind of like motion blur. It's what motion blur is, what gets you out of uncanny valley for starters. And the other thing was, there were points of it where I was looking and I felt like I was watching some sort of BBC period drama from the 70s that had been shot on video, you know, in a studio. You know, it just felt. I don't know. I just didn't think it worked. I mean, I understand. I believe actually Cameron is using this for the Avatar films that are coming as well. You know, I get these, that they got to try these advancements, but I'm like you. I think you know, it's become such a thing now that that just to see a film flat projected 2D at its normal frame rate is quite hard to do when they release these, because obviously the studio and the cinema chains are very keen for you to go and experience you know, the latest thing, and
well, not that they're keen for you to experience the latest thing. They're keen to make money.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, the thing is, you're having to pay extra for these 3D glasses. You know, it was such a shame, because it was in so many screens. And it's like, well, if you want to watch it normally, you got to go to the smallest screen at the far end of the multiplex, and not one of the big screens where we've put all the 3D versions of it.
Yeah.
I was like, I did feel like quite disgusted by that.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I think it's changed a little bit since then.
It's changed a lot, because 3D at the moment it's going down the drain, because a lot of people don't go to it.
Well, no, because, and interestingly, I mean, you know, obviously Sky stopped broadcasting in 3D, Sony have stopped making 3D TVs, and 4K UHD discs, unlike Blu-rays, you can't get 3D versions of films, so it is a bit of a dying fad. I mean, I've got my sort of little rules of thumbs about things, and my rule of thumb with this is, if a film was specifically shot in 3D, I'll go and see it in 3D. Otherwise, I prefer to see it in 2D rather than some sort of post conversion. And then the same with IMAX. If a film has scenes that were actually shot in IMAX, then I'll go the extra hog and go and see it at the BFI IMAX, but otherwise I'm just happy to see it on as big a screen as possible with a decent sound system, sat in a good position in the cinema. Back to that. You know, otherwise, there's a lot of this stuff that's and I definitely, as I said, I tried this HFR, and at the time I wasn't particularly impressed with it. If I'm honest, I was distracted by it, which I shouldn't have been. I should have been into the story.
But I mean, so when it comes to the army of the battle of the five armies, which I think it's more like six armies, but hey, it doesn't sound so good. I mean, the story is that so at the beginning, Smaug is defeated. So the second one, you were left with this cliffhanger that Smaug was going to go out and destroy the city that's sort of near the Misty Mountain, and but then that's taken care of within the first half an hour, and then the rest is about the defense of this mountain and the different armies that are making their way there. And it becomes a mess, and it is
so boring. I mean,
yeah.
you know, it's interesting. You know, I was obviously, one of the things I criticised King Kong about was the fact it was too long and too indulgent. You've got the same problem here in the fact that you know, I really enjoyed the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which, you know, obviously was a trilogy of books in the first place, and you know, really, really good, faithful adaptations, and obviously very much a passion project again with Fran Walsh and Peter Jackson. But the Hobbit films, did I enjoy them? Not at all. I was actually bored out of my mind through them. Did they need to be three long movies at that? No, not really. You know, and it did just feel like retreading of ground for the sake of it. I think it would have been interesting to see what, again, another wonderfully interesting film director that I hope we talk about at some point, but Guillermo del Toro, who's obviously now a BAFTA and an Oscar winner. Now we're recording this, but you know, I think it would have been really interesting to see what he'd done. In fact, one of the things I find quite interesting as well is obviously Universal went to Peter Jackson back in '95 and said, look, you know, you can either make Creature from the Black Lagoon or King Kong, and obviously King Kong was his favourite film that he's made. I've been lucky enough to see Del Toro in a Q&A, and you know, one of his most influential films from his childhood was Creature from the Black Lagoon, interestingly enough. So so there you go. But these films just felt, I thought, unnecessary.
Yes, they were a cash grab. I mean, they were absolutely a cash grab. They could have just gone with two films or even one film, but because they went, oh, we got to have a trilogy because Lord of the Rings was a trilogy, and this is what we're buying into. We're buying into the Lord of the Rings vibe. We're doing the Hobbit. We're going back to Middle Earth. You know, and I don't think Peter Jackson's heart was in it that much.
No, I agree.
I think he originally was just going to be executive producer on it and let Guillermo del Toro do it, and I think that would probably have been the better way of doing it. But Guillermo wanted to do it as two films, not three. But the studio wanted three. Yeah, they wanted that extra film ticket to make that extra money.
No, absolutely. And of course, you know, they had to do it all in what was vogue at the time with the whole 3D and all of that stuff. But I feel the same way about this. I mean, you know, some people hate me that I don't like the Hobbit films, but I just really don't. There's nothing that excites me in at all. And then the other thing I didn't like was them sort of you know, retroactively trying to insert characters from Lord of the Rings into this that weren't even in the Hobbit. you know, let's get, you know, Orlando Bloom back, because no one will notice the fact that he's like, you know, 15 years older or whatever it is by now. You know, it's and a character that's not supposed to age or whatever, and this is a prequel. So you know,
and also we're going to put in a lady elf in there. So she can fall in love with one of the beardless dwarfs, you know.
Was that an addition? That was an addition.
Yeah, that's an addition.
Okay. Whatever.
Yeah.
It didn't need it. It almost felt like, you know, we'll go there again, but you know, like you get a really good trilogy and then they make a prequel trilogy, so you kind of know where it's going, and it all feels a tad unnecessary. It's not, that journey's not as interesting as the one that we embarked on originally.
And you know, the other thing I didn't like about the first Hobbit film was so when they did the scene with Gollum, they never used they never recreated the shot that they used at the beginning. of Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
We never got to. They never did anything close to that shot. I was like, "What the?"
Yeah,
fuck?
because that would seem like the sensible thing to do. Yeah, weird.
Yeah, I mean, I know you can't get Ian Holm to come and do it. I mean, you've got somebody else playing Bilbo, but just recreate that shot. Why not recreate that shot? It's a great shot of him finding the ring, but no, This is something else. I mean, that scene was great. I mean, it was great to see Andy Serkis back as Gollum, and it did. That scene did play very well, and I think that was that was good to see that scene. But a lot of the rest of the film was it was treading old water.
Yeah. Again, not I mean, these have huge budgets anyway, but not a badly made film by any means. They're fine, but just I mean, I really wasn't that interested, and the one that you picked, the last one, I have to confess, I actually dozed off in the cinema during, and that takes a lot for me to fall asleep in a movie, no matter how bad it is. Yeah, it's a real big deal. And normally, if I ever did do that, I'd want to instantly go back and rewatch it. But I've had no desire to go back and see these films. I've not watched them on home video, since they've come out. I saw them once each at the cinema. I saw the middle one in HFR 3D, and I chose not to see the last one in that. And yeah, I just found them dull and quite boring, really. And I would say, even though I picked obviously Kong as movie hell, because I knew you'd pick this, and we agreed we didn't want to each pick a different Hobbit film for hell, because that wouldn't be fair. But I would far sooner sit through King Kong than I would these films again, personally. So I know where you're coming from, and it's a shame because I do think Peter Jackson is a great filmmaker, but I do feel that maybe exec producer of this and consultant or whatever would have been a better role than actually directing it and giving us what we got.
Yeah, but as I say, there's the studio one.
Oh, it's a business. Yeah, it's the business.
Yeah.
This is not a independent wingnut film or whatever. This is a studio flick, and and I think that's why Del Toro left as well, wasn't it? Was because he wanted to do the, like you said, the two-parter or whatever. But there was pressure to make it a trilogy. So and very over-bloated. Yeah.
Yes, and then of course now, no idea what he's sort of working on. I believe he's working on the next Tintin film with Spielberg, but and according to IMDb, there is a Untitled World War II documentary. Oh no, World War One documentary. But there's nothing in the there's nothing out there saying what he's doing next, if he is doing anything.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Maybe he's taking a break.
Finally, yeah. Maybe he is.
Maybe it's like, well, what can I do next? What do I want to do?
And he's not encroached on the world of television like most directors have of late. No, just having a look. I'm just having a look.
Not that I can tell.
It's
I mean, I'm looking at his director's credits.
Yeah, you're right. There doesn't seem to be anything in development or anything, according to this.
Well, I know he's the producer of Mortal Engines, but that's it. It's just producing. Maybe just what he wants to do is just sort of produce stuff and not be in the director's chair. Who knows?
Who knows?
But I mean, if that's his choice, because I mean,
hey, he's earned it.
yeah, I mean, he's got a very good body of work. It's, you know, it's surprising to think that the guy who started off making Bad Taste went and made Heavenly Creatures and then went and made Lord of the Rings. Nobody could predict that kind of career.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you know, he's done well. He's definitely an inspiring and influential filmmaker, and you know, for the most part, I really enjoy his films.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I'm totally with you. Hobbit, I really struggled with.
Yes.
You know, King Kong, as I said, I've just got my reasons, which I wish I could articulate better than I have, but. I've got my reasons.
I think you articulated them very well.
And yeah, and we'll see where we go, I guess.
I hope you enjoyed us going over a director's work again. We are planning to do more.
Oh
of
yeah,
these.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But even though we've had loads of sort of offshoot episodes, we've still, you know, obviously film, whether it's you know, the history side, the filmmaking side, the people involved, you know, the genres. It's such a big topic that there is quite literally so much stuff we can talk about and scratch the surface of. And you know, we've had the opportunity to get some interesting guests on, and yeah. You know, we always do try in most cases to bring it back to something involving movie heaven and movie hell, even if it's not talking about a specific director. So, you know, we always try and have that there. And it's always you and me, Simon. So it is what it is, right?
Yes. I just wanted to say that we're going to be dropping the A to Z stuff just because it is, with everything else that's going on. It is sometimes difficult to, you know, see the work of a director we're not sort of that well known with. And that was kind of the case of why it's been sort of, we've not done many of these recently. So we're kind of dropping the A to Z, and we'll be...
So we'll be picking them at random, will we? Yeah.
Yes.
Because we're still going to do directors heaven, hell, but not... Yeah, because I mean, I guess, you know, what we did, because we sort of both grew up in the same generation with the same sort of influences, was we went with the usual suspects, I guess, or the, you know, the what you'd expect in the first pass of the alphabet. And then, you know, there are a lot. I mean, there are some letters that there's dozens of film directors to talk about, and then there's others which there's fewer of. But it's the homework. Yeah. It's the balance and the homework with a day job and trying to do your own filmmaking as well. That's the tricky bit when you haven't seen all of the films of some classic director, and then you think, I want to do it a proper service and go back and watch everything before I pick one, and that can take some time sometimes.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time.
But I'm all for discovering new stuff as well. So, you know, it's a balance.
So we'll be mixing it up, but it won't be like the A to Z.
Fair enough.
Just to give us a chance. Otherwise, you know, we'll never get through the second round of the A to Z. But yes, do expect more of these. You know, our regular episodes to come. But we have so much more coming as well.
We've got some very interesting guests lined up in the coming months. So please stay tuned for that.
Indeed. So Keith, where can people find your work?
Okay, if you go to YouTube and put in British Isles, EYLES, as in my last name, there are some short films on there that I've made. Also put my name into IMDb and you can see other projects that I've worked on. Projects.
And as always, you can find my work at independentrunnings.com. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and all good podcast providers. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Movie Heaven, Movie Hell. And please leave us a rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher. It all helps. So, Also, I have a bit of news that I just want to sort of leave on. I actually shot the final scene to my feature last week.
You did. Congratulations on that, by the way. Yes, well done. 7 years in the making.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Oh, so you could have done the Lord of the Rings trilogy in that time.
Guess so. Yeah. Yeah.
No, well done though. Well done on getting that finished.
Thank
It's
you.
very hard to do when you're doing it all on your own and you have no backing and money and you have to find your own time to do it. I totally get that, and I admire anyone that achieves it. So well done, matey.
Thank you. And now, so it's all in the can. So it's just we're in post production now. Even though most of the post production on these stories have been done, so we're well ahead on that. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the film will be ready for the summer. So.
And no doubt we'll have podcasts delving into this, correct?
That's right. We will have podcasts with the cast and crew, and sort of talking about their career, and because I've had the opportunity to work with some really good actors and crew, and I even worked with Keith.
I was involved somehow. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, Keith's good.
Yeah. There you go.
So as we say, look forward to hearing those episodes, as well as the other guests we have lined up, and of course more of our looks at the work of directors. So thank you for listening, and join us on the next episode of Movie Heaven, Movie Hell.